This tale, for me, begins about 10 or 12 years ago. I wasn't long out of college, and I thought myself to be a novice ghost hunter. I would take friends out to old cemeteries late at night, old abandoned and run-down farmhouses, long-defunct asylums, abandoned hospitals. Really anywhere I thought we could find ghostly activity. While there are many tales I could tell you, this one has stuck out in my mind over the years. This was before GPS was an easily accessible thing, and the smartest phones we had could play Snake and send texts, but not much else. To find Asbury Cemetery back then, you had to know where it was. This isn't a huge place we're talking about. The nearest town has a population so small that they didn't even participate in the most recent survey, and a county that only has a population of about 17,000. In fact, the first time I ever visited, I was told to seek out a tiny 2-room post office and follow written directions from there. This is no massive cemetery where thousands are laid to rest. There are only a few hundred here, at most. So why, then, am I telling you about such a tiny, insignificant graveyard? Well, let me tell you about my first experience with the place and what I've come to find out since then. I remember when I first read about Asbury Cemetery. It was on a now-defunct Horrors of Mississippi forum. I have since looked for those original posts, to absolutely no avail. They just don't seem to exist anymore. And without an exact web address, even the Wayback Machine can't help. The original poster told us about many a mysterious event that happened in and around Asbury. Visiting late at night was supposed to imbue you with an incredible sense of foreboding, a physical oppression of your senses, an extreme desire to get away as fast as your feet could fly. Strange noises, unexplained sounds that aren't normally heard in a Mississippi forest. A sense of eyes on you, that creepy, crawly feeling running along your spine, dreading every odd crunch of the leaves, knowing that with absolute certainty that if you turned around and looked out over the hillside, you would see a thing of horror, slowly making its way towards you with gnashing fangs and claws shining bright in the moonlight. He went on to tell us that for a town that was so small, there was an unnatural amount of wrecks on the road leading to the cemetery. More than the tiny, winding dirt road should be able to account for. There were so many, and all with incredibly similar sounding stories. Teenagers, seeking something to do, would hear about this place and seek it out. Youths from neighboring Houston and the other small towns, all of which said the same general thing. They would flee the place after hearing cackling and strange noises coming from the woods, and would be chased by either a large, windowless black van or a group of incredibly large black dogs. Huge black dogs or a large, windowless black van. Keep that in mind. I'm going to come back to that. So, being the brave young ghost hunter that I was, I immediately gathered a group of my friends to go check it out. Crawling slowly down the dirt road, nearing midnight, we finally found the cemetery and pulled in. Call it group psychosis, call it herd mentality, call it whatever you'd like, but we absolutely immediately experienced a chill as soon as we stepped out of the vehicle. All of us. Nerves on edge, we crept around the graveyard looking at the dates on the stones. 1800s, 1900s. There were very few that were later than 1950. I was making my way around the outer edge when we heard a piercing scream. A friend of mine, who had always claimed to be more in tune with the spirits than I was, had been clawed deeply on her back. For her sake, we all decided we had had enough for the first visit and loaded back up into my car. Fast-tracking it out of there, we traveled on the road for a while. The whole time I was looking out for headlights or the glowing eyes of a canine. Slowing to a stop, I started to turn to my friend to check on her injured back. Just as I started turning, the head of the biggest, blackest dog I had ever seen stuck its entire head through my window and barked loud enough that I thought my eardrums were going to bleed. Stomping the gas pedal, I got us out of there as fast as I humanly could, swearing the entire way. Luckily, I'm an excellent driver, and we left the winding dirt road behind us with no crash. Now, since that first visit, I have done much research and many more late-night trips into the area surrounding Van Vliet and the cemetery itself, as well as speaking to a few residents. I was told, not too kindly, by the local tow truck service that I should quit talking to the locals and leave well enough alone. Leave the past dead and buried, I was told. But luckily, before he told me to kick rocks, he did tell me about something that I hadn't heard before. Not far from Van Vliet, in fact only about 10 miles away on the old Natchez Trace, was a spot that is known as Witch Dance Hill. It's now been recognized as a national park, and you can go have a picnic there if you'd like. Local legend tells of witches dancing under the light of the full moon, the very ground they stood on becoming cursed to the point that the grass would die and never to grow back again. The local record told me to do some research on the place. While there isn't much to be found, tales of witches all over Natchez Trace are plentiful. Through a source that doesn't want to be named, I think I finally solved the case of old Asbury Cemetery. I had given up hope of ever finding anything concrete about the source of the evil there when I was contacted anonymously on one of the message boards I belonged to. Back in the 1850s, when Van Vliet was just a small farming town and watering hole, Anon's great-grandparents owned a cotton field and scratched out a living there. During one of the hottest summers on record, the town was failing. The long drought had decimated the crops, and the local townspeople blamed a young woman who had moved in the summer before. While everyone else's crops were withering away to dust, her garden was green and plentiful. Perhaps she had happened to settle over a deep-running spring and had access to water the townspeople didn't. So many years have gone by, the exact truth of it has been lost to time. She lived alone with an enormous black dog, and of course the townspeople cried, "Witch! Witch!" and gathered up torches and pitchforks. She begged and pleaded with them, but hunger and superstition can turn most any man unreasonable in these long, hot, dreadful southern summers. They built a gallows in the center of town, along with a large plinth of wood to burn her body on, and marched her out to stand trial for what she had supposedly done. She begged again, and told them that she had nothing to do with their plight, her cries, of course, falling on deaf ears. As the noose was lowered over her head, she screamed out that they were making a terrible mistake, and that she would curse them all for what they had done. That she would take their sons and daughters, and that she would visit them every full moon just to remind them what they had done. Right before the lever was thrown that ended her short life, she laughed and cackled, and began calling for her big black dog to come save her. The townspeople thought she had gone mad, because the dog had been shot and killed in the struggle to tie her up. But me personally, I don't think she had gone mad at all. I think the dog was her familiar, and while she was looking out over the crowd in a seemingly blank stare, she was seeing it, waiting for her on the other side. Anon goes on to tell me that after the townspeople had watched the young accused witch's feet stop twitching, they all lost their nerve. Ashamed of themselves, the women cried out and begged the men not to burn the poor woman, that it wasn't right. Giving in to their wives, they buried the body in the woods near the cemetery, with nary but a wooden cross to mark where she laid. Time doesn't tell us if she made good on her promise to take the sons and daughters of the townspeople, but I believe this poor woman, witch or not, now haunts the area near where her body lays, scaring young people as much as she possibly can, taking the form of a huge black dog or a large black van to terrify them into fleeing. I think that poor woman's bones are laying out there to this day, somewhere deep in the woods near Asbury Cemetery, and her soul wanders the area, miserable and mad at the world. I have decided that I will no longer visit Asbury or the surrounding areas, and I highly advise you to stay away as well. Who knows what can be found deep in the southern woods, or what might find you if you're fool enough to go looking for it. Sometimes the right thing to do is leave the past dead and buried.